The interstellar xenobiological preservation complex, Station Kepler-7, floated in the void like a monument to organized chaos. Imagine, if you will, a structure the size of Manhattan, crafted from materials that could probably survive a supernova, housing the galaxy's most prestigious collection of endangered species, experimental ecosystems, and political egos large enough to require their own gravitational fields. The station represented the Galactic Union's commitment to biodiversity, which was really just a fancy way of saying, let's keep samples of everything in case someone accidentally genocides it later. The station operated under a strict hierarchy that would make even the most rigid Earth bureaucracy weep with admiration. At the top, the predator species, Vex'ral, Corthian, Drexili apex hunters whose ancestors had clawed their way to the top of their respective food chains and decided, quite reasonably, that this qualified them to run everything forever. Below them, the herbivores, the omnivores, the silicon-based life forms, the energy beings, and so on down the ladder of respectability. And at the very bottom, somewhere between automated cleaning drone and decorative plant, you'd find humanity, humans. Those weird primates from Sol 3 who had somehow stumbled into faster-than-light travel despite having invented it mostly by accident and sheer stubbornness. The galaxy had taken one look at humanity's lack of natural weapons, mediocre senses, and tendency to pack bond with literally anything that held still long enough, and promptly classified them as maintenance class. Not slaves. Mind you, the Galactic Union had very stern regulations about slavery. No. Humans were simply recognized as being naturally suited to service positions. Janitors, technicians. The folks who fixed things when they broke and cleaned up when things got messy. The fact that humans were suspiciously good at these jobs, often solving problems that had stumped species, with triple their IQ scores, was politely ignored by everyone involved. Mikhail Torres had long since made peace with the absurdity of his situation. Here he was, holding a philosophy degree from Cambridge that had cost him 6 years and more student debt than some countries' GDP, mopping floors on an alien space station while creatures who couldn't spell epistemology gave him orders. The irony was so thick, you could cut it with a knife, or would be able to if the Galactic Union hadn't classified knives as potential weapons and restricted them to predator species only. He pushed his maintenance cart through the dim corridors of Section 7C, the environmental simulation wing. Night shift suited him. Fewer people around to remind him of his place in the cosmic pecking order. Just him, his cart, and the gentle hum of life support systems keeping several thousand alien organisms alive in their artificial habitats. Mikhail had been working Station Kepler-7 for 3 years now. 3 years of watching scientists half his intelligence get credit for his troubleshooting. 3 years of being talked past, talked over, talked around, but never actually talked to. 3 years of nodding politely while Vex'ral researchers explained basic concepts to him, with the patience one reserves for particularly slow children. The money was decent, though, and Earth needed the currency flow from human workers scattered across the galaxy. So Mikhail mopped floors, fixed environmental controls, cleaned specimen tanks, and tried not to think too hard about the philosophy degree gathering dust in his personnel file. Tonight's excitement included a malfunctioning temperature regulator in Habitat Zone 7C14, a backed-up waste reclamation system in the aquatic section, and approximately 4,000 square feet of corridor that needed mopping because someone from the Drexili delegation had tracked bioluminescent slime through half the station. Just another Tuesday in paradise. Mikhail whistled tunelessly as he worked, a habit that apparently unnerved some of the station's inhabitants. Humans were one of the few species that made music for no survival-related reason whatsoever, and it freaked people out. Good. Let them be freaked out. It was literally the only power he had. The Vex'ral were currently the station's most distinguished guests, which meant everyone was walking on eggshells and triple-checking everything. The Vex'ral weren't just any predator species. They were the predator species, apex hunters from a world where pretty much everything wanted to kill you, and evolution had obligingly provided them with the tools to kill it right back. Picture a creature that looked like someone had crossed a big cat with a wolf, then decided that wasn't terrifying enough, and added crystalline fur that could shift from soft to razor-sharp at will. 6 eyes arranged in a way that gave them nearly 360-degree vision, retractable claws that could punch through starship hull plating, and a bite force that made Earth's extinct T-Rex look like it had a mild overbite. Then make them intelligent, and give them starships. And an empire spanning 14 systems. The Vex'ral Ascendancy had sent a delegation to inspect Station Kepler-7's breeding program, an attempt to preserve some of their own endangered subspecies. This was a massive honor that had the station administrator, a nervous bird-like Quellan named Administrator Preetka, molting from stress. The delegation included High Matriarch Velshara, her mate consort Drathmar, 3 other high-ranking Vex'ral, and because apparently the universe hated Preetka personally, their cubs. 5 Vex'ral cubs, ranging in age from what Mikhail guessed was equivalent to human 5-year-olds to maybe 10-year-olds. They padded through the station with the confidence of creatures who knew bone deep that they were superior to everything around them. Other species staff members practically plastered themselves into walls when the cubs passed. These weren't just children, they were tiny future conquerors, and everyone knew it. Mikhail had seen them during the delegation's tour earlier that day. Cute, in the way that baby apex predators are cute right up until you remember what they'll grow into. The smallest one had stared at him with all 6 eyes, head tilted in confusion, probably trying to figure out why a human was walking upright instead of scurrying away. Now, 12 hours into his shift, Mikhail was working his way through the environmental zones when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. A soft, rhythmic chittering, the Vex'ral equivalent of shivering. He stopped his cart, head cocked, listening. There it was again, coming from Habitat Zone 7C14. The same zone with the malfunctioning temperature regulator that maintenance had supposedly fixed this afternoon. Mikhail sighed. Of course they hadn't actually fixed it. That would require competence, and the station's maintenance department rationed competence like it was a finite resource. He approached the Habitat Zone's entrance, a large transparent barrier that showed a recreated forest from some Vex'ral colony world. The temperature readout on the exterior panel made him wince, 4 degrees Celsius. The zone should be maintaining 22 degrees. And there, curled in a miserable ball near the barrier, was a Vex'ral cub. Mikhail recognized him, the smallest one from the delegation, the one who'd stared at him earlier. His crystalline fur was flat against his body, which Mikhail's research binder had told him was a sign of cold stress. The cub was alone, separated from his family, too proud or too stubborn to call for help. For a long moment, Mikhail just stood there, weighing his options. This was not his problem. This was emphatically, definitively, absolutely not his job. The smart thing, the safe thing would be to call it in, let the Vex'ral delegation handle it, and walk away. But Mikhail had not made it 3 years on this station by being particularly smart or safe. He'd made it by being human, which meant he came factory-equipped with the galaxy's most dangerous evolutionary trait, the ability to look at a creature that could definitely kill him and think, "Ah, poor baby's cold." He pulled out his communicator, overrode the habitat lock with his maintenance credentials, because of course they gave the janitor override codes. Who else was going to clean up at 3 a.m.? And stepped inside. The temperature hit him immediately. Not just cool but actually cold. The kind of cold that promised hypothermia if you stayed too long. The cub's head snapped up, all 6 eyes widening. Up close, Mikhail could see the kid because that's what this was. A kid was in rough shape. Shaking, fur completely flat, crystalline coating dulled. "Yeah, I see you," Mikhail muttered, more to himself than the cub. Someone screwed up the environmental controls. Again, because of course they did. The cub hissed a sound probably meant to be threatening, but came out more like a kitten sneeze. Adorable. Terrifying, but adorable. Mikhail looked at the cub. Looked at his own thermal work jacket, the one thing keeping him comfortable in the station's sometimes erratic temperature zones. Looked back at the cub. The universe, he decided, had a sick sense of humor. "This is stupid," he announced to no one in particular. "This is the stupidest thing I'm going to do all week." And I once tried to explain Kant's categorical imperative to a Quellan who thought ethics was a type of fuel. He shrugged off his jacket and approached slowly, hands visible, movements deliberate. The cub tensed, clearly torn between pride and the fact that he was absolutely freezing. Mikhail crouched down, still a good 6 feet away, and tossed the jacket. It landed near the cub, who stared at it like it might explode. It's a jacket. Thermal weave, keeps heat in. You know, warmth? That thing you don't currently have. Mikhail gestured at it. I'm not going to hurt you, kid. I'm not even physically capable of hurting you. You could probably take my arm off without trying hard. But right now, you're cold, and I've got a perfectly good heat source just sitting there, so maybe swallow your pride for 30 seconds and use it. The cub's 6 eyes tracked from the jacket to Mikhail and back again. The shivering intensified. Pride warred with survival instinct. Survival won. Moving with the wounded dignity of the very young and very stubborn, the cub crawled over to the jacket and, after a moment's hesitation, burrowed into it. The effect was immediate. The shivering eased, the crystalline fur started to fluff back up, and the cub made a sound that Mikhail's research binder probably classified as contentment vocalization, but really just sounded like a very big kitten purring. There you go, Mikhail said, standing up. His arms immediately prickled with cold. Great. Fantastic. He was going to freeze, while a baby apex predator napped in his jacket. This is what he got for having a functioning conscience. Now I'm going to go fix the actual temperature controls, and then we're going to pretend this never happened, because if your parents find out a human touched you, I'll probably end up as a cautionary tale. Deal? The cub watched him with those 2 intelligent eyes but didn't move from the jacket cocoon. Mikhail spent the next 20 minutes actually fixing the temperature regulator. Turned out someone had installed a component backwards, because apparently engineering degrees from prestigious universities didn't include basic spatial awareness in the curriculum. The habitat zone slowly warmed back to proper levels. The cub stayed put, wrapped in Mikhail's jacket, watching him work with an intensity that was mildly unnerving. When the temperature hit 20 degrees, Mikhail approached again. All right, little guy, time to give that back. Your parents are probably wondering where you wandered off to. The cub made a sound that was definitely not agreement. Those claws, still tiny but already sharp, dug into the jacket fabric. Come on, don't be like that. I've only got 2 of these, and the other one's got a coffee stain that I swear is gaining sentience. Mikhail held out his hand. I won't tell anyone about this if you won't. We can both maintain our dignity, sort of. After a long moment, the cub reluctantly extracted himself from the jacket and pushed it toward Mikhail with one paw. Their eyes met 6-2, and Mikhail had the distinct impression he was being evaluated, judged, measured against some standard he didn't understand. Then the cub chirped a sound Mikhail didn't recognize from any of his research and scampered toward the habitat zone's exit. Mikhail retrieved his jacket, now covered in crystalline fur and significantly warmer than before, and made his escape before anyone found him fraternizing with the upper classes. Morning came too quickly, the way it always did after a night shift. Mikhail was finishing his rounds, looking forward to his bunk and 8 hours of unconsciousness, when the shouting started. Well, not shouting exactly. The Vex'ral didn't shout. They did something that was somehow worse, a low, resonant vocalization that made every prey species instinct in 100 light-year radius scream hide. Mikhail rounded the corner to find the entire Vex'ral delegation, plus Administrator Pritka, plus what looked like half the station's senior staff, all clustered around Habitat Zone 7C14. Right where he'd been last night. His stomach dropped. Oh no. Oh, this was bad. High Matriarch Vex'ral was the first to spot him. All 6 of her eyes locked onto him with laser focus, and she moved with that liquid grace that predators have, closing the distance between them in seconds. Mikhail's entire nervous system screamed conflicting instructions. Run. Don't move. Play dead. Apologize. Fight. He settled on standing, very, very still. You, Vex'ral said, her voice like gravel being tumbled in a steel drum. You are the human who works this sector. It wasn't a question. Mikhail nodded anyway. Behind Velshara, he could see the cub from last night, whose name he later learned was Kresh-Tar, watching him with all 6 eyes. Yes ma'am. Matriarch. Your, what was the proper honorific? His employee handbook hadn't covered how to address the mother of a cub you technically touched without permission. I maintain this section. Is there a problem? My son, Velshara said, each word precisely enunciated, claims a human provided him aid last night when the environmental controls failed. The gathered crowd went silent. Mikhail could feel every eye, and there were a lot of eyes, given the species diversity represented, turned toward him. Administrator Pritka looked like he was going to molt himself into non-existence. I can assure you, Matriarch, that any contact was certainly minimal and completely professional, as per station protocols regarding, I asked the human. Velshara's tone could have frozen helium. Mikhail took a breath. Well, he was already screwed. Might as well be honest about it. Yes ma'am. The habitat zone's temperature regulator failed. Your son was cold. I gave him my jacket while I fixed the controls. Then I left. That's all that happened. The silence stretched out like taffy. Then Velshara did something that made every prey species in the corridor take an involuntary step backward. She laughed. It was not a comforting sound. It was the kind of laugh that suggested, I'm about to do something you won't expect, and you probably won't like it. You gave him your jacket, she repeated, as if testing the words for structural integrity. Yes ma'am. A human gave a Vex'ral cub your jacket. It seemed like the practical solution at the time, ma'am. Velshara stared at him. Mikhail tried very hard not to think about his own mortality. Then the matriarch turned to Administrator Pritka. Your human showed more sense than your entire maintenance department. The temperature failure could have caused serious harm to my son. She looked back at Mikhail. You have my thanks. Strange as that is to offer to your kind. And just like that, the crisis was over. The delegation departed. The crowd dispersed. Administrator Pritka looked simultaneously relieved and confused. Mikhail was left standing there, wondering what the hell had just happened. He went to his quarters, a converted storage closet that smelled faintly of industrial cleaner, and collapsed onto his bunk without even removing his boots. He'd worry about the weirdness tomorrow. Tomorrow's weirdness came sooner than expected. Mikhail arrived for his night shift to find a crowd outside his quarters. Not just any crowd, the Vex'ral cubs. All 5 of them. Just lying there, curled up in a semicircle around his door. Asleep. What? Mikhail said aloud. In the actual hell. One of the cubs, not Kresh-Tar, a slightly older one, cracked open 3 of her 6 eyes, looked at him, made a contented chirping sound, and went back to sleep. A Quellan security officer hovered nearby, looking deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation. They've been here for 4 hours, she chittered. Won't move. Their parents are displeased. I can imagine. Mikhail stared at the pile of apex predator cubs blocking his door. Did anyone try moving them? You're welcome to try. Mikhail approached carefully. 5 pairs of eyes, 30 eyes total, open to watch him. The cubs made no move to attack, but they also made no move to leave. If anything, they seemed pleased to see him. Okay, Mikhail said slowly. We're not doing this. This is not a thing that's happening. Your parents are probably having a collective aneurysm, and I'm definitely not equipped to handle. He gestured vaguely at the pile of alien children. This. The cubs stared at him. Shoo. Mikhail tried. Nothing. Go on, git. One cub yawned, showing rows of very sharp teeth. I don't suppose any of you speak trade common? Mikhail asked hopefully. Kresh-Tar, the smallest, chirped something that sounded almost like words. The other cubs responded in kind. They were definitely communicating, but Mikhail's translator implant wasn't picking it up. Cub vocalizations probably weren't in the database. This was a problem, a significant problem. Mikhail needed to get into his quarters to change and access his work schedule. But he couldn't exactly step over a pile of cubs belonging to one of the galaxy's most powerful species without causing an interstellar incident. He sat down in the hallway, back against the opposite wall. The cubs watched him with varying levels of interest. "You know," he told them conversationally, "where I come from, we have these animals called cats. Little predators, domesticated about 10,000 years ago. They do this exact same thing: lie across doorways, stare at you like you're the inconvenience, refuse to move for anything. We've written thousands of years of poetry about their stubborn independence. Is this a predator thing? Is spatial inconvenience just hardwired into apex hunters?" The cubs, predictably, did not answer. But one of them, a medium-sized cub with darker crystalline fur, crawled closer and plopped his head on Mikhail's lap. "Oh, come on," Mikhail protested weakly. But he was, despite his better judgment, petting the cub's head. The crystalline fur was surprisingly soft when it wasn't in combat mode, warm and slightly vibrating with that purring sound. This was how Administrator Pritka found him 20 minutes later, sitting in a hallway, covered in Vex'ral cubs, looking like he'd given up on understanding the universe. "Torres," Pritka chittered, his translator giving his voice an edge of hysteria. "What did you do?" "I gave one cold kid a jacket," Mikhail said tiredly. "That's it. That's literally the only thing I did. The matriarch is demanding explanations. I don't have explanations. I'm a janitor, not a xenopsychologist." But explanations were demanded anyway, which is how Mikhail found himself in Station Kepler-7's main conference room, facing down the entire Vex'ral delegation while their cubs napped in a corner, having refused to be separated from him. High Matriarch Vex'ral looked at Mikhail like he was a particularly confusing puzzle. "Our cubs have imprinted on you," she said flatly. "I'm sorry?" "Imprinted. Bonded. They see you as..." She paused, searching for words. "Pack protector." It is a response typically reserved for elder pack members who have proven themselves through acts of unexpected defense. Mikhail blinked. "I gave a kid a jacket. You gave a Vex'ral cub aid when you had no obligation, no expectation of reward. You saw vulnerability and responded with protection." Vex'ral's tone was carefully neutral. "This is not behavior we expect from prey species. It's barely behavior we expect from our own kind outside immediate family." Consort Drathmar, sitting beside his mate, rumbled agreement. "You confused them. Vex'ral society is built on strength, dominance, the natural order. Then here comes a human soft, weak by our standards, who acts to protect without thought of gain." His ears flicked back. "You broke their understanding of how the universe works." "I really didn't mean to," Mikhail offered. "Clearly." Vex'ral glanced at her cubs, who were starting to wake up and look around for him. "Unfortunately, the damage is done. Cubs this young cannot be reasoned with. They've decided your pack. They'll follow you, seek your presence, resist separation." Administrator Pritka made a sound like a garbage disposal eating cutlery. "How long does this last?" "Until they feel secure," Vex'ral said. "Could be days, could be weeks." Mikhail raised his hand. "Can I just point out that I have a job? I clean. I fix things. I can't do that with a trail of cubs following me around." "Then I suggest," Vex'ral said with a smile that showed entirely too many teeth, "you work quickly." And so began the strangest week of Mikhail Torres's life. The cubs followed him everywhere. And when Mikhail said everywhere, he meant everywhere. Cleaning the aquatic section? Cubs watched from the observation deck, steaming up the glass with their breath. Fixing air circulation in the botany labs? Cubs attempted to help by batting at his tools. Mopping corridors? Cubs walked directly through his wet floor tracks, leaving crystalline paw prints that he then had to clean again. The station's population reacted to this development with varying degrees of horror. Prey species gave Mikhail's entire trajectory a wide berth, not because they feared him, but because he came with an escort of baby apex predators. Some of the braver souls stopped him to ask questions. "What's it like?" a young Quellan researcher asked, watching the cubs from a safe distance. "Imagine herding cats," Mikhail said, trying to fix a recalcitrant air filter while one cub chewed on his tool belt. "Now, imagine the cats have 6 eyes, retractable claws, and diplomatic immunity." "It's exactly like that." The cubs, for their part, seemed to find everything about Mikhail's job fascinating. They watched him work with intense focus, occasionally trying to help in ways that absolutely did not help. One cub, the darkest one, whose name Mikhail learned was Vex'ral, tried to assist with unscrewing a panel by simply ripping it off the wall with her claws. "No," Mikhail said firmly, taking the panel away. "We don't destroy station property, we maintain it." "There's a difference." Vex'ral tilted her head, all 6 eyes blinking in sequence, and made a questioning chirp. "But," "because," Mikhail explained, crouching down to her level. "If you break it, someone has to fix it. Usually me. And I'd rather spend my time doing something other than repairing things that didn't need breaking." He held up a screwdriver. "Tools exist for a reason. They let us manipulate our environment without destroying it." He demonstrated, carefully unscrewing another panel. The cubs watched like he was performing magic. "See? Now the panel comes off, I can fix what's inside, and the panel goes back on. Nothing broken, everything working." He handed Vex'ral the screwdriver. "Here. You try." What followed was 10 minutes of a Vex'ral cub carefully learning to unscrew things. Her tiny claws weren't really suited for fine motor control, but she persevered with a determination that reminded Mikhail of the human toddlers he'd once watched learn to use forks. The other cubs immediately wanted to try. Mikhail, because he was apparently incapable of learning from his mistakes, ended up teaching 5 Vex'ral cubs basic tool use in a maintenance corridor at 2 a.m. "This is insane," he muttered, but he couldn't quite suppress a smile when Kreshtar successfully removed and replaced a panel all by himself, looking up at Mikhail with an expression that absolutely screamed, "Did you see that?" "Good job," Mikhail said, and Kreshtar's purr could probably be heard 3 decks away. Word of the situation spread through the station like wildfire. Xenobiologists started showing up to observe, taking notes, scanning readings, generally treating Mikhail and his involuntary charges like they were an experiment. Dr. Zenith, a particularly enthusiastic Quellan xenopsychologist, practically vibrated with excitement. "This is unprecedented. Humans emitting calming pheromones, evidence of latent psychic ability, pack bonding capabilities we haven't documented." "Or," Mikhail said, balancing on a ladder while fixing a light fixture with 3 cubs watching from below and 2 trying to climb up to join him. "Hear me out here, maybe your kids just recognize when someone's being nice to them." "Nonsense, there must be a biological explanation." "Sure. The biological explanation is that I'm part of a species that evolved to raise helpless offspring for extended periods. So we're really good at spotting when something small needs help and actually helping it. It's not magic. It's just how humans work." Dr. Zenith wrote that down, nodding. "Fascinating. Species-wide caretaking imperative." "We should run tests." "We absolutely should not run tests," Mikhail said firmly. "Because A, I'm not a lab rat. B, they're children, not specimens. And C, I've actually got work to do." But the attention didn't stop. Scientists, diplomats, even some of the station's more curious staff members started, accidentally, passing by wherever Mikhail was working, finding excuses to watch the human janitor and his entourage of small predators. The cubs, at least, were adjusting. They still refused to sleep anywhere but outside Mikhail's quarters, a situation that had required the installation of heated floor mats, because Mikhail wasn't going to let kids sleep on cold metal grating. Species politics be damned. But they were at least less panicky when he went into his quarters alone at shift end. Progress, Mikhail supposed. Nighttime became their special time. After the station's day shift ended and most of the population had retired, Mikhail would sit in the corridor with the cubs curled around him, and he'd read aloud from maintenance manuals, equipment documentation, or sometimes just make up stories. The cubs didn't understand most of the words, but they didn't care. They just wanted to hear his voice, feel his presence. It was the safest they'd felt since leaving their homeworld, and Mikhail was starting to understand that Vex'ral culture, for all its strength and dominance, didn't include much in the way of comfort. "Your people," he said one night to Kreshtar, who was draped across his lap like a very heavy, very dangerous blanket, "need to work on your childcare philosophy. Kids need to know they're safe. Not because they're strong. Not because they're dominant, but just because they're kids. That's how you build confidence, real confidence. Not the fake kind that comes from intimidating everyone around you. Kreshtar purred and kneaded Mikhail's leg with claws that were, thankfully, retracted. On the fifth night, High Matriarch Vex'ral came to find him. Mikhail was in the middle of explaining basic circuitry to the cubs, using a broken lighting panel as a visual aid, because apparently he was now running an impromptu educational program for apex predator toddlers when she appeared. The cubs chirped greetings, but didn't leave their positions around Mikhail. Vex'ral watched this for a long moment. You're teaching them. I'm keeping them occupied. There's a difference. Mikhail held up the panel. Also, they keep breaking things trying to help, so I figured if I taught them how things actually worked, they might break fewer things. Enlightened self-interest. They listen to you. Vex'ral sat, a movement of liquid grace. They don't even listen to their combat instructors this well. Maybe your combat instructors are boring. The words were out before Mikhail's brain caught up with his mouth. He froze, waiting for the explosion. Instead, Vex'ral made that rumbling sound that might have been laughter. Perhaps. Our methods are traditional, harsh. We believe cubs must be strong to survive. They're already strong, Mikhail said quietly. They're Vex'ral. Strength is in your genes. But being strong doesn't mean you can't also be kind. Being dominant doesn't mean you can't also protect. Your son was cold, alone, and scared. His strength didn't help him. Someone caring enough to give up their own comfort helped him. Vex'ral's ears flicked. You speak boldly, for a human. I speak honestly. Your rank, your species, your ability to turn me into a fine red mist, none of that changes basic facts. Kids need care. They need protection. They need to know that sometimes, someone will put their needs first. That's not weakness. That's how you raise people who are secure enough in themselves that they don't need to prove their strength by dominating everyone around them. The silence that followed was heavy. The cubs had stopped what they were doing to watch the exchange between their mother and the strange human who'd become central to their world. Finally, Vex'ral spoke. Our culture has spent generations building itself on strength, on dominance, on the natural order of predator over prey. We've conquered 14 systems. We are respected, feared, obeyed. She looked at her cubs, curled around Mikhail like he was the center of their gravity. But when my son was cold, strength didn't help him. When my cubs felt uncertain in a strange place, dominance didn't comfort them. A human with a jacket and a willingness to read maintenance manuals did. I'm not trying to insult your culture, Mikhail said carefully. You don't need to try. Your actions already do. But Vex'ral didn't sound angry. She sounded thoughtful. We call your species prey. Weak, suited only for service. Yet, you possess something we've lost, the ability to see a creature in need and help them without calculating advantage, without considering hierarchy, without questioning if they deserve aid. She stood, towering over Mikhail, even when he got to his feet. You've given my cubs something I could not, the knowledge that strength without compassion is just brutality. That protection is not weakness. That sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the galaxy is not claws or fangs, but someone who looks at a cold kid and says, "Here, take my jacket," Mikhail finished. Vex'ral's expression was unreadable. Then she did something that made every cub's eyes widen. She bowed her head to him. Just slightly, just enough to acknowledge him as something other than beneath her. Our delegation leaves in 2 days, she said. The cubs should be ready by then. Their connection to you will fade with distance. Should I do anything differently until then? Continue as you have. Teach them. Care for them. Show them what strength with kindness looks like. Vex'ral's ears flicked. And Torres? You have the gratitude of the Vex'ral ascendancy. For whatever that's worth to a human janitor. About the same as it's worth to a high matriarch, I'd guess, Mikhail said. Just 2 people trying to figure out how to raise kids in a complicated galaxy. Vex'ral left without another word, but Mikhail could have sworn he heard her make that rumbling laugh sound as she went. The last 2 days passed quickly. Too quickly. Mikhail had never thought he'd get attached to a bunch of alien children who'd initially terrified him, but here he was, feeling genuinely sad at the thought of them leaving. The cubs seemed to sense the approaching departure. They became clingier, following even closer, chirping with increasing frequency as if trying to make sure he was still there. On the final night, Mikhail gathered them all in the observation deck, a large room with transparent aluminum walls showing the stars beyond. He'd brought his tablet with photos of Earth, and the cubs crowded around to see. "That's where I'm from," he told them, showing images of forests, oceans, cities, mountains. "That small blue planet, third from its Sunday. We're not the strongest species, not the smartest, not the most advanced. But we're here, and we're trying." He showed them pictures of Earth's predators: lions, tigers, bears, wolves. "We have apex predators too. We learned to live with them. Sometimes we even learned from them. Being prey didn't mean being helpless. It meant being adaptable." Kreshtar touched the tablet screen with one claw, gentle as a whisper, where a photo showed a human child with a golden retriever. "That's a dog," Mikhail explained.